Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, and so we will begin our Governor's Task Force Student Debt Meeting, the first that we will have. Welcome. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this first meeting. I am Michelle Reinen. I am with the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection and will be assisting in facilitating this meeting and the upcoming meetings that we will be having. To kick things off, we have a few housekeeping items, as one always does when you are in a new environment. Normally we're covering where the restrooms are located and what to do in need of exits should there be a fire. But in this case, we want to cover some WebEx basics and get everyone on a baseline. Do our roll call and introduction, since we aren't seated around a round table, if you will. And then we'll just go over some basic meeting ground rules as well. So to begin, we'll go with the WebEx basics. And you can see on the screen, I just tried to take a screenshot of what WebEx will look like for the participants that are using video today. So with that, just want to cover the microphone situations and muting that and video, how to look at your participant list, as well as any chat function that you may need to use, because that is how we'll be taking our questions today as it relates to any of our speakers. So the screenshot that's on the bottom side, you can see on the bottom panel of WebEx, and you can get this by moving your mouse over that bottom portion. If you're not familiar, you just get a series of buttons. The microphone with the slash through it, that is when it's gray, is on and active. Up on the top is when it is red. If you follow my mouse there, that is when you are muted. Your video button works the same way. When it's gray, your video is on, and you should be able to see a picture of yourself as well as other members who have their videos on. When it's red, your video will be off. You will not likely see the sharing because we won't be having you as presenters at this point in time. But the people, the little person here, cartoon character, is your participant list. If you'd like to see who's all on the call, you can go through that participant list. And then we have the little comic bubble here, and that is our chat function. And the chat function will be very important today in that if you have a question of a participant, when you have that question, please chat it in to everyone. I'll be compiling questions and asking those of our speakers today and our presenters. And if you are dialed in, if you are calling in to WebEx, please submit any question that you have to our student debt email box. And that is studentdebttaskforce@dfi.wisconsin.gov. And I'll repeat that for anyone who's calling in that may have a question of our presenter that's on the task force, studentdebttaskforce@dfi.wisconsin.gov. And today we will be taking questions from our task force members, of our presenters and guest speakers, as this is your business meeting for this first task force meeting. However, if we do have public members joining us today, it's not a public hearing, so we won't be responding or receiving questions from the public as part of the meeting. But we certainly want to hear from you, and if you have comments or questions, you can use that same email box to submit that information and comments, but we won't be making that a part of our meeting today, as it is a business meeting for the Student Debt Task Force. And the other option that we have today is to raise your hand should we get into a conversation or chats or issues come up. There is a means, if you have your participant list open, when you select your own name, you have the ability to raise your hand. That's not a feature that I have shown. You can see that in the graphic, my hand is raised next to my name. And so when we'll be trying to watch that participant list to see if there are items there, if you are struggling to use chat or need to raise your hand to communicate in some fashion. Just so everyone is aware, we are recording today's meeting as well, as it is a public meeting. So next we're going to do introductions, and I'm going to stop sharing this presentation for a moment so we can see some faces and go through our basic roll call, if you will, in the effort that we don't have a round table and can't just go around the room. I will be calling off names in the order that they were listed through the governor's press release, and just asking you to please acknowledge that you're here. Please correct me if I have mispronounced your name. Indicate what organization you are with, as well as be sure to indicate, your job role and what you bring to this. But we'll quickly be going through this roll call, and then we'll move on to those meeting ground rules. Just had a preview too, and then we will hear from the secretary, Kathy Blumenfeld from DFI. So we will start there with our roll call. Kathy Blumenfeld.
Hi, everyone. Thank you and welcome to our first meeting of the Student Debt Task Force. And I am the Secretary of the Department of Financial Institutions and thrilled to be launching our task force today and to have all of you here with us contributing to a set of recommendations that we'll be giving the governor at the end of the summer. So welcome, thank you. I look forward to working and getting to knowing all of you shortly.
Derek Campbell.
Hi, everyone. I'm Derek Campbell. I work in the Office of the Governor as a policy advisor, specifically focusing on higher education policy. I echo Secretary Blumenfeld's sentiments. I'm so excited to work with all of you and get to work and get some really innovative solutions out there.
Welcome. Connie Hutchinson.
Hi, I'm Connie. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Higher Educational Aids Board. We are actually the agency that oversees student loans and talks to students about their debt. And I'm happy to be on the task force.
Thank you. Laura Sutherland.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Sutherland. I'm the administrator for the Division of Trade and Consumer Protection at DAGCAP. And I'm also a director of the Wisconsin Coalition on Student Debt. And I'm very excited to work on this task force with everyone and meet everyone and come up with some great solutions for Wisconsin.
Kiana Jones.
Good morning. My name is Kiana Jones.
Kiana, I think that you have frozen up. So I don't know if you can hear us, but one thing may be helpful is if we're having connectivity issues, video can take quite a bit. We want to encourage the use of video to get to know each other, but at the same time, if we have stability issues, I think turning off videos can assist with that. We also have a dial-in number if things become unstable for individuals, or I've experienced it myself, so there is another way to participate to be sure that you can hear everything as part of the meeting. But welcome, Kiana. For me, some of that cut out, but we will catch up with you again.
Thanks, Michelle.
Great. Larry Graves.
Yes, good morning. My name is Larry Graves. I'm an education consultant with the State Approving Agency. We're a small group within the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs. In our work, we approve programs of training and education programs for use of GI Bill. And also we do compliance work. So we do audit work to the schools and educational places that certify GI Bill students.
Barant.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jeff Barant. I am the State Relations Director at UW System. My role is to lead the team that engages UW System and each of our 26 campuses with state government and other external stakeholders, and very excited to be here to find ways we can better serve our students now and into the future.
Welcome. Brandon Trujillo. Trujillo.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Brandon Trujillo. I'm a policy advisor with the Wisconsin Technical College System, and I'm excited about being on the task force and doing work on behalf of students in the state of Wisconsin. So thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca Larson. You are on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry. My name is Rebecca Larson. I'm Senior Vice President at the Wisconsin Association of Independent Colleges and Universities. And that organization represents the 24 private nonprofit colleges and universities throughout the state. And in my role, I do all policy work, both federal and state. And I'm excited to be part of this and to see what we could do to support students. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Representative Ballwick.
This is Bethany from Representative Ballwick's office. She's planning on attending. I think she's just having trouble with the remote access, so she's working on it.
Great. Thank you, Bethany. Representative Hesselbein.
Hi there, can you hear me? Perfect. Great, well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be part of this. I'm a representative from the far west side of Dane County, Middleton, Waunakee, Westport, areas like that. I have 3 kids, one graduating, I think this weekend, virtually from UW Milwaukee. I have another daughter who's at UW La Crosse, and the third one is going to be at UW Oshkosh this fall. Really became interested in student loan debt after reading this book a few years ago. So really looking forward to moving Wisconsin forward and hopefully getting bill passed to help students. Thank you.
Senator Smith.
Yes, thank you. I represent the 31st states. Represent the west coast of Wisconsin, and my role, of course, is to carry the impressions that the constituency that we serve bring to the table, and then carry that message back and learn from you, the professionals. I am here to learn and contribute what I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Shannon Holsey.
Hi, good morning, everybody. This is Shannon Holsey. I'm the president of the Stockbridge-Muncie community. I am also the president of the Great Lakes Intertribal Council that represents the 11 tribal nations of Wisconsin. I'm incredibly honored and excited to be working with this fantastic team, and I'm especially encouraged by the ability to find solutions to our state as it relates to building our infrastructure, reducing student debt, and helping build families. Thank you.
Masad Hakdar. Masood Akhtar, are you with us?
You hear me?
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Hey, I'm on mute now. So Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Masood Akhtar. My background is I'm an entrepreneur and heavily involved in community activities. I started a movement called We Are Many United Against Hate because of the rise in hate crimes against minorities. And I learned pretty quickly from some former white supremacists that economic insecurity is a breeding ground for hate. To address that, education was on the top of my list. So I started an organization called Empowering a Student for Success that provides interest-free loan, mentoring, and other things. So I'm glad to be a part of this team and work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Kiamani Alford.
Hello, everyone, and good morning to all of you. I am Kimani Alford. I am the current president of the Wisconsin Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, WASFA, where we represent over 400 financial aid administrators within the state of Wisconsin. I also serve as Director of Student Financial Support Services at Madison College. So I bring about 20 plus years of higher education experience, specifically in the financial aid industry. So I am privileged to be a part of this task force and look forward to learning and basically formulating recommendations and strategies for the governor.
Thank you. Karen Bauer.
Good morning, everyone. I am Karen Bauer. I'm a consumer protection attorney at the Legal Aid Society of Milwaukee, where I help low-income student loan debtors as part of my job, both in front of courts and involving the Department of Education. Since 2007, I've been teaching classes for attorneys and others on their student loan repayment options. And I'm excited that I myself applied to try and get my $160,000 in student loan debt discharged through public service loan forgiveness last week.
Very exciting. Jody Chung.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jody. I am currently a legal assistant at the Moen Schienemeyer firm in La Crosse, Wisconsin. I'm about to start my first year of law school at UW-Madison, and I am extremely excited. This is a huge privilege for me. I think it'll be an interesting experience to both learn as well as see what I can contribute to the Student Debt Task Force with my experience, my personal experiences with student loans, as well as just what I've researched and learned throughout my college and my work years at the firm. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you for being part of the group. Lucy Fenzel.
Hi, I'm Lucy Fenzel. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I am currently the interim Dean of Letters and Science for the College of Menominee Nation, as well as I hold other roles. I am on adjunct biology faculty because that's my area of expertise. But then I'm also their acting chief academic officer and their Green Bay campus site coordinator. I'm very interested in helping to get the Native students' voice heard with regard to student debt. Native students come in with a much different economic outlook than a lot of other students. And I think that having the Native voices heard from our two Native American TCUs will be a really great help to us. Thank you.
Renee Gash.
Hi there, my name is Renee Gash. I live in De Pere, Wisconsin, and I'm a media consultant and activist here. My alma mater is UW-Madison, and I finished my master's degree in the middle of the Great Recession. So I took on a fair amount of student debt in order to complete that degree. So this is a topic that's very relevant to me personally.
Austin Hammond.
Good morning, everybody. I just want to say I'm grateful to be here and for this opportunity to get to meet you all and serve on the task force. I'm a political science student at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. I serve in student government on the executive board as VPPT, and I'm hoping to bring a current student's perspective and so yeah, I'm excited to be a part of this.
Welcome. Marisha Harris.
Good morning, everyone. I am
very excited to be here with all of you today. My name is Marisha Harris, and I'm the lead community relations analyst for Goodwill Industries of Southeastern Wisconsin and Metropolitan Wisconsin. I too am elated to be part of this task force, and I cannot wait to see what we come up with together. Looking forward to working with each and every one of you.
Renee,
Hi, good morning. I think I'm up next. Sorry, it's lagging a little bit. My name is Renee Howard Paez. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm the Director of Diversity at Marquette University High School. And I work a lot with our low-income families, first-generation Spanish-speaking immigrant minority families. So I'm excited to provide the high school perspective. And student debt is something we're talking about in Milwaukee at the high school level quite a bit. So I'm very looking forward to working on these issues together.
Derek Kindle.
Everyone, Derek Kindle from UW-Madison, working within the Division of Enrollment Management. And like Kimani, Kevin, and others here, my background is in financial aid. Really looking for ways to eliminate debt for the most financially vulnerable and to manage it. And so happy to also have student voices on here. Thank you.
Paul Kundert.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Kunert. I'm the president and CEO of the UW Credit Union here in Wisconsin. We're a $3.7 billion financial institution, ranking in the top 10 of all Wisconsin-based financial institutions. We serve about 300,000 member consumers focusing on their retail needs. We're a mission-driven organization. Our mission is to improve the financial well-being of people, and our long affiliation with the University of Wisconsin has positioned us over the years as a top lender to Wisconsin students, especially those attending a University of Wisconsin school. I'm very passionate about consumer well-being and consumer protections. And in 2014, I was appointed by the Department of Education to serve on a policymaking group that helped reform predatory practices students were facing in campus-based banking agreements. And I'm pleased with the impact that had in curtailing those abusive practices. And I really just look forward to bringing our perspective and the expertise we have in student lending to this discussion. I feel very strongly about the need for access to education and recognize that student lending has played a significant role over years in helping people be first-time college attendants. But today we see many factors I'm sure we'll get into have led to an excessive amount of debt and a burdensome amount of debt for many consumers. So very pleased to meet you all and very excited to see what we can do to help our citizens and people continue to have access to education in an affordable way.
Kevin McShane.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin McShane. Similar to Kimani, I serve right now as the past president of the Wisconsin Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, WASFA. So I work closely with Kimani in that capacity, representing the financial aid professionals across the state. In addition, I serve as the vice president of financial aid and compliance at Herzing University. I have about, similar to Kimani again, about 20 years of financial aid experience as well. And I'm looking forward to serving as a resource for people, to help better understand some of the complexities within the financial aid realm and how the Title IV programs work, as well as other student loan debt. And I'm just really looking forward to coming up with effective solutions that help not only with the student debt burden, but also continue to increase access to more vulnerable populations. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie Miller.
Hi, I'm Jamie Miller. I am a bankruptcy lawyer throughout the state of Wisconsin. One of our practice areas is discharging student loans in bankruptcy. We also help our clients negotiate private student loans and also help set up income-based repayment plans. I'm also the president of the Milwaukee Jewish Free Loan here in Milwaukee, where one of our primary efforts is to give out interest-free loans throughout the southeastern Wisconsin, interest-free student loans throughout southeastern Wisconsin. And it's a non-sectarian agency. And I'm looking forward to doing what I can to help bring resolutions and help people get out of student loan debt. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Madursky.
Morning, everybody. I'm Mike Madursky. I am the president, or was president and chief operating officer of McFarland State Bank, a local community bank here in Dane County. We recently merged with another strong community bank, Oregon Community Bank. So now I serve as the chief administrative officer for the combined institution, which is right now about $1.3 billion in assets. And I'm just looking forward to and excited to be part of this task force. So thank you.
Michael Rosen.
The FAST Fund, Faculty and Students Together, that provides financial assistance to Milwaukee Area Technical College students when they're experiencing economic emergencies. Prior to running that organization, I was a faculty member at Milwaukee Area Technical College. I taught economics for 29 years, and I was also the faculty union president for the last 17 years of my tenure there. I'm excited to be here. Our student MTC is the only majority minority college in the state, and our students have a lot of economic need and a lot of debt, and this is a very important issue and commission for them. So I'm honored to participate.
Alexandra Shea. Alexandra, are you able to be in attendance? Are you with us?
Hello.
Yes.
Hi. Can you hear me now? I feel like this commercial. Okay. First of all, happy Wednesday to everybody. I am Alexandra Shea. Feel free to refer to me as Alex. My pronouns are she and hers. I am the Director of Corporate Social Responsibility for CUNA Mutual Group, which is an insurance investment and financial service company. We believe that a brighter financial future should be accessible to everyone. In my role and in my capacity, I oversee our foundation, our community relations, sustainability, employee volunteerism, and engagement. The reality is, and it continues to be, that a brighter financial future is not currently accessible to everyone. So similar to my fellow task force members, super delighted, honored, privileged to be on the task force, and also here to make sure that we are asking the most important questions when it comes to ensuring that we are not burdening those individuals that we seek to help, and that we really are going to be providing financial recommendations that get at addressing the inequities that currently exist under marginalized and underrepresented communities here within the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you. Welcome. Sylvie Eisen.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sylvie, English major and administration major here at UW Milwaukee. I'm also the current treasurer for our student association as well as being a advisor for our financial aid department here on campus. As a current student who does have student loan debt, while also advising and advocating other students on financial aid, responsibility, and financial literacy, I do hope to bring all that experience here to this task force as well. Thank you, everyone.
And Representative Baldwin. Yes, there is an echo. I think we lost her. As I'm seeing other people, I think we did do temporary loss, but it is good to know that she's been able to join us and hopefully can still hear the conversation. So next thing we'll do, since we all but Representative Baldwin got through our introduction list, is just want to go ahead and go through those meeting ground rules that you got the sneak peek to. And so here, as part of our virtual meetings and when we're able to meet as a group in person, want to just have some basic ground rules that we can all agree to. Probably seen these many times before, but if we could just have respectful communication, because this could be a very dynamic conversation and trying to reach resolutions and recommendations for our state. I'll agree to active listening and attendance and participation being very critical to achieving the objectives and goals of the task force. If you're unable to attend, please remember that you have the option and encouraged to send a substitute or someone who can represent. We encourage no multitasking, and if you could silence cell phones, turn them off when you're at home, turn off email if possible, so we can focus for the 3 hours that we have together. Make sure that we're using all our creative juices here and have open-mindedness in reaching ideas and resolutions, and again, listening and preparation. There may be pre-work, pre-reading materials that will be sent to you to help further discussions and brainstorming sessions and activities. The goal will be that we will get those items out to you 24 hours in advance at minimum. So again, if you can be sure that you try and save some time for any pre-work. Given those meeting ground rules, it's my pleasure to turn the remainder of this portion, welcome over to the chair of the Student Debt Task Force, the Secretary of Department of Financial Institutions, Kathy Blumenfeld.
Great, thank you, Michelle, and nice job facilitating. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the task force. You might recognize this screen as the executive order number 67 that Governor Evers signed. Seems like years ago, but it was actually in January. And our intention, of course, was to launch in March. The third week, which most of us can remember, was a life-changing week for all of us. So we appreciate your patience, and we're so excited to be launching our first meeting of the task force today. And I don't know about all of you, but for me, it feels like a little bit of back to normal in terms of, yes, there is a definite COVID impact on student debt and borrowing, but it feels a little bit outside of the day-to-day COVID focus that probably all of us have had in both our work and our personal life. The governor, as you know, has had a lifelong dedication to education. And this topic is something very near and dear to his heart on so many levels. And it was his intention to assemble the best and brightest people around our state from diverse perspectives to come together to try and see what we could do at the state level to help people that are struggling with student debt and really debt in general, because oftentimes student debt borrowers will have other types of debts and other types of struggles as well. I'm very excited and I'm very humbled to be among this group. I wish that we were able to be sitting around a table and getting to know each other and having conversations, but that isn't the case. So I'm grateful for the technology that can bring us all together. And we will do everything in our power to build community and to build team within our task force. So we are open to listen together, to learn together, and to share ideas and have healthy discourse. So at the end of this process, we can come up with a set of recommendations for Governor Evers in time to get included in the next biennial budget. We also have great representation, bipartisan representation from our legislature here And we know that we have the ability. This is not a polarizing issue. There are people that are Democrats, Republicans, all parts of the state that are impacted by student debt. So our goal is really to come up with a set of workable, practical, and implementable solutions that we can put forward. And I have great confidence and trust that this is the right group to do that. Before I move too far along, I do want to just say a quick thank you and gratitude to a team of very hardworking people that have gotten us to this date. So Marco Uzerevich, Cheryl Rapp, Cody Kastorf, Catherine Haberlin, Jess Nelk, Laura Sutherland, Connie Hutchinson, and our great facilitator, Michelle Reinen, have worked really hard in preparation for this day, as well as the governor's office in helping us stand up this task force. So thank you very, very much. We just did introductions. If you move to the next slide. So you can see all at once. You should also have this in your e-binder that we sent out last night. And I'm hopeful that, again, we can build community among this group, and that we actually build a network and a lasting network that will be able to address issues in the future as well, even beyond the 8 meetings that we're going to have together, 8 or so meetings that we will be having. We will be adding, I know, one more person from the Department of Safety and Professional Services, Casey Wachniak, who I believe is on the call as well. So we're also excited to have the perspective of the DSPS with us as well. So again, thank you. It's an extraordinary group. Each of you have been picked for a reason. You bring expertise, you bring a lens that will be very important in helping craft and shape our future recommendations. If you go, we have a list of our 8 proposed meetings. You'll see here that we have some topics, agenda items for each meeting that hopefully will get at all the issues that we've been tasked with in our executive order. And it'll be a little bit fluid depending on speakers and speaker availability. Right now, you'll see we have all the times from 10 to 1, and we're planning right now to have all of these meetings virtually. That may change. We can all hope that things open up, but right now, just to be on the safe side, we're going to plan for these virtually. I think we're all going to be expert virtual meeting people by the end of this, and we'll keep you apprised on topics as we go forward. Michelle mentioned if you can't make a meeting, do let us know and let us know who your delegate will be. You can see our last meeting right now is slated for the middle of August. That's when we'd like to wrap this up. The governor has also said if we need to go longer, we certainly can. These are really important issues. So it is possible, but at this point, we'll see how it goes and have a vision and a plan for how to get us from our first meeting to a set of recommendations. So it'll take all of us working together to achieve that. Some of you are expert speakers, and we would love to have you participate and share your areas of expertise depending on the topics you see at hand. So please reach out to either Marco or Cheryl or myself or our student debt email box, which we will monitor closely. And you'll have that information in your, we'll even send it out afterwards as well, just to know that you have one mailbox that you can always send requests, information, questions to, and we will monitor that closely and respond. So if you have an area of expertise that you would like to contribute, we'd love to have it. We might not be able to fit every speaker in, but we will make sure that we are able to share the information. And then you'll see today, we're going to conclude with 3 actual borrowers with very different stories. So if there are there are borrowers that you think have compelling stories that would like to share their story with us in terms of like a public input, we would be happy to have that as well. We have everything from, you know, every, as I said, such a diverse group. And we have a lot of research and data to support where we're headed. But I think it also makes it very real when we hear from real stories from real people. And at each point during our meetings, we'll be having an educational component because again, some of us spend all day, every day in the space, and some of us just spend part of our day, and some of us have different ways in which we intersect student debt. And so we will be trying to build a common level of understanding and knowledge. We'll be sharing reading that we would really like that you do over time to help build your own knowledge set and frame of reference. You're also welcome to send us things to share with the entire group. When we look at today's meeting, we've got an action-packed meeting and obviously 3 hours. We probably have 10 hours of content, so we're going to try and shave as much as we can off and get you out of here at 1 o'clock. After my comments, we'll be hearing from our Chief Legal Officer at DFI, the Department of Financial Institutions, Matt Lynch, who will talk to us a little bit about ethics, which is really important in this task force and the way we do open meetings and so forth. Michelle will talk to us about shared goals that many of you sent in earlier. And then we'll have Dr. Nick Hillman from the UW come and do kind of a student debt overview. So he's one of these people that spends all day, every day in student debt and kind of share a common set of knowledge with us. And then followed by Seth Frotman, who is an expert and also dedicated his life to student debt, to talk to us about the COVID impact. And then we will take a break. We will have 3 student borrowers give us their stories, and then we will wrap up and hopefully adjourn by 1 o'clock. Alex just said, is it possible to get the reading materials out 48 hours in advance? That is our goal. So sorry it was a little short this time. There's nothing that had to be read ahead of this meeting. But we will aim for a 48-hour turnaround in the future. So thank you. And also our student debt task force email address was chatted in by Cody. So you can grab that as well. And then we have set up a website you'll see on the next slide that is dedicated for our student debt task force. So you'll see in the upper right corner is a tab on our Look Forward Wisconsin website. That this will house all the relevant information. It will have anything that you need related to our student debt task force, and you can get to it directly through. And if you want to maybe Cody chat in you can see it at the bottom. But if anyone wants to cut and paste it, the Look Forward website address. You can also get to it through a link on our DFI website as well. So anything you need will be found here. And if there's something you can't find or don't see, please reach out to us and ask us for that. Quick flyover, just high level what we're seeing in student debt. Nick and Seth will get into it in much more detail. But nationally, it's widely reported that there are 45 million students who owe approximately $1.6 trillion in student debt. And here in Wisconsin, we have more than 24 billion in outstanding debt, according to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Next slide. Making matters worse is the fact that FINRA reports that 53% of Wisconsinites are living paycheck to paycheck each month. And this was before COVID hit us. So I think that the situation is probably even more compelling now. This puts students and families in a very precarious position, and it is even more likely that people will default on outstanding debt, especially if an emergency or an illness should arise. And while student debt is a serious concern, it's not the only type of student debt that impacts families. More families are taking on more debt to help their kids pay for school. And a recent report by AIG shows that 36% of college students in the United States say that they have more than $1,000 in credit card debt. And we know this is not a sustainable set of affairs. On the next slide, you'll see that last year, we were fortunate to have a series of student debt listening sessions. And we held them in Green Bay, La Crosse, Milwaukee, and Wausau. And listed here are some of the themes that we heard from many, probably over 100 people that testified. These recordings are actually available to you on our website. So if you're interested in listening to them, the actual testimony, you certainly can. We also have a summary of the themes in your e-binder that was sent out. But we heard many students tell us stories about beginning their professional lives burdened by financial anxiety and soaring debt. We also heard from parents and grandparents about the multi-generational aspects of this problem. Several said that they never thought they would see the day when their debt was paid off. And many spoke about being saddled with such large debt that they're only able to repay just enough to avoid default, which leads even to owing significantly more than the original balance down the road. And in addition, there's a lot of confusion about how different repayment plans work and if consolidating or refinancing is a right move. Countless attendees said they didn't know who to turn to for trusted advice. So please feel free to read those summaries, and also, if you're even more interested, to listen to the stories. We also know that now we have COVID-19. That's making matters even more challenging. And Seth Frothman will be joining us later as the head of the Student Borrower Protection Center, and he will be sharing kind of the impact that the pandemic is having on borrowers. So deciding how much debt to take on to go to college is perhaps one of the most serious financial decisions a lot of students make. Unfortunately, many don't fully understand the ramifications of that debt until it's too late and they have to start paying it back. This results in students and families often having to choose between paying their bills or defaulting on their loans. We also see how this issue hits even harder for vulnerable communities like minorities, Native Americans, low-income, veterans, people with disabilities, and women, to name a few. We heard these struggles from so many as we traveled across the state this past year. And as a mother of three, I know how challenging it is to put multiple students through college, which is why I am so passionate about finding creative and uniquely Wisconsin solutions to help out students and families. I know that tackling this growing student debt crisis with stakeholders from across the state is going to be a great journey for all of us, and I welcome you. Together, we'll tackle this issue head on and deliver a set of impactful and practical recommendations. So thank you very much for the work that you have done and will do as we go through this journey. With that, I will introduce Matt Lynch, who again is our DFI Chief Legal Counsel, and he will talk a little bit about ethics as we move through this journey. Matt?
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm very excited for this group. You've got quite a lot on your plate, both today and in your time together. But first, like any crafty mother in setting this agenda, Secretary Blumenfeld decided you first need your vegetables. So that's my presentation here. I promise it will be a very, very small survey for this group. Just a quick, it's an ethics refresher for a lot of you who've been in government service, but this board's a little different than most in that we do have some newbies to government service. So welcome. This is an official government board. We are talking official business. You are doing public business right now. So welcome to public service. Going along with public service, a few little rules to keep in mind. They're very small for this group, and we can get through them pretty quickly. If we can just move on to the next slide here. The first one has to do with open records. I know a lot of people have heard about open records. You see that referenced in the newspaper sometimes, but it's not just for journalists. Wisconsin has one of the strongest open records laws in the country. Anybody can go and request government records, as long as your request is specific enough and meets some other requirements. And some of you may not know it, but you've got open records in your inbox right now. The records relating to the board's activities, its public business, are technically open records, subject to any request from any member of the public who wants to see them. So what does that mean for you? Well, it actually isn't going to be too difficult for you. There are a number of exceptions here. First, materials that are obviously just purely personal to you, don't have anything to do with this board, don't have anything to do with this board's business. Don't worry about those. Those are not open records. No one's going to be going through your inbox with private messages with mom. Same thing goes for notes and drafts for personal use. If you're putting together a presentation for the group and you're going through different rounds of drafts, don't worry. Those early drafts that you hate are not going to be open records. It's only the final draft that gets shared with the group, shared publicly, that becomes an open record. The third exception, unsolicited listserv and other general public communications. You might sign up for a listserv or even just have a listserv start sending you some things on student debt or anything else. If it's just sort of generic materials that are coming from some outside source and not directed to you personally necessarily, that's not going to be public records. And then the big one for you, you probably have a number of emails in your inbox relating to this task force. If somebody from DFI is copied on one of those emails, you don't need to worry about it. We've got that record. We'll keep it for you. The only records that you really do need to worry about as board members are going to be records that, for example, emails you may get from somebody you know, somebody who knows you're on the committee who says, hey, I know you're on that student debt task force committee. Here's an interesting idea, or here's a topic. Why don't you raise this for the rest of the task force? It might be an email that nobody else at DFI is copied on. If that's the case, then that's a record that we don't have, but it's nevertheless a public record. So you need to hang on to it. And there are kind of two ways that board members tend to do this to make sure that that public record that they're hanging on to is preserved and made available for the public. One way to do that, what some board members do, probably the less common way, is if they get an email like that, they just boom, immediately forward it to somebody at DFI who's doing the administrative work with the committee. So in this case, I think it'd probably be Marco. I think you all have his email. If you want to, if you get a message like that where you see that nobody from DFI is on the CC or the to line, you can go ahead and forward it to him. Get it out of your mind. He'll preserve it. We'll have it in the DFI electronic database for public records purposes. The other way to do it, probably a little bit more common, is that board members they'll just create an Outlook folder, throw all their board emails in there, and then at the time their board service is done, they'll just go through that, pick out any that don't have DFI already on it, and then just forward them to us at the end so that we can preserve those for public records in case anyone ever asks. Those are kind of the two ways to go about doing that on open records. Pretty simple, but certainly if you have any questions, I've got contact information on another slide here. Feel free to ask me about that. So, and this is kind of the records that you need to keep. But then if you go to the next slide, and we'll talk about the other law that comes into play here. This is law for open meetings. And you'll see there, every meeting of a government body shall be preceded by a public notice. For certain topics has to take place in open session. The reason for that is we want done in public, where the public can hear what's going on and can listen into the debate and be informed. And it doesn't do much for the public being informed about government if the meeting's really going on behind closed doors, and then you come out in the public and put on a show and either vote or skip the debate and just do your vote. So what the open meetings law means, or when it applies, is when members get together for the purpose of talking about board-related business. So if you want to have a party, that's fine, as long as you're not talking about board-related business. You're not going to violate open meetings. But members are getting together for the purpose of talking about business, and they're getting together in a sufficient number to actually block or affect some sort of business of the task force on their own. That's the sort of situation where you could get together with a group of your friends. It's enough to enact some measure. You all get together, decide, okay, we're all going to vote this way. You show up to the board meeting. You don't even have to debate anything because you've got the votes already in hand. That's what the open meetings law is looking to avoid. So the situation there is you can talk to other members of the board about board business a little bit. Don't talk to too many of them. Once you reach a number that gets to the level of being a majority of the board or even less than a majority of the board, enough to block some sort of action, then that's the kind of meeting that needs to be preceded by notice and agenda so the public can be a part of it. So a couple of questions come up here from time to time on what about emails? You know, the open meetings law traditionally applies to in-person meetings. That's simple. Of course, that's a meeting. Telephone conversations, it's a little bit more removed, but the law has been pretty clear. That's a meeting too. But the law has also been clear, well, letters, that doesn't really count as an open meeting because it's not really a two-way communication. Emails kind of fall in the middle there, right? They're kind of like letters, but also they're a little bit more like telephone calls because they can sometimes invite two-way communication. The key there on emails is if you're emailing the entire task force as a group, try to make sure that it's limited to things like scheduling, agenda, maybe handouts or articles that were referenced in a prior meeting saying, hey, following up, here's this article I mentioned. But don't send out emails to the group that invite any sort of back and forth, any sort of debate. That kind of debate needs to take place in this task force meeting among the group. So I'm happy to answer any questions about those two issues, but open meetings, public records really should be pretty straightforward for this group. I don't anticipate any problems, but those are numbers to call if any issues come up.
Matt, one question that did come up from the group is how are comments or feedback received via social media or text message treated in public records law?
Well, it depends on where those comments and feedback are coming from. So if it's a personal, if you've got, for example, the DFI Twitter feed, that's all a public record. Everything we get on there is going to be a public record. You've got personal social media. If it's something that gets into the substance of board business, if it's not something just like, hey, I see you're on that board, congrats. That's not a public record. It's not diving into board business. But if it is something that does make suggestions for the task force or get involved in the substance, hang on to it. And let me know, just send me an email and let me know either during your board service or after, if you have records like that, and we'll figure out a way to make sure we capture them so that they're preserved.
Thank you very much for this overview. And if participants, task force members have questions, thanks for providing your contact information for them. All right. Moving on to our next item is shared goals. You were asked as task force members to via email to provide one goal that you had for the task force. And we wanted to just provide you a condensed summary of what we received from members of the task force that were able to answer that question. And the side column on the left definitely gives you the big overview. We want to examine, consider, explore, propose, prepare, ensure, communicate, and keep. So overall, what does that really mean? Examine past and present data to inform work and identify trends. We want to look at the data and trends. Consider the needs and impacts of all populations and make sure all student populations have a voice. Explore student borrowing options, need-based aid, subsidies, full tuition loan coverage, halt interest if payments are being made. These are the terms and ideas that came from you as task force members. Explore other state solutions, as you saw from the full breakdown that was shown by the secretary. You know, we will be exploring other states and information. Propose new and innovative solutions to address the crisis. Propose measures to help ease the current burden. Prepare low-income and first-generation students with financial options at work to their advantage. Ensure Wisconsinites are able to receive higher education moving forward without fear of encumbering excessive student debt. Communicate with Wisconsin students managing debt and balancing financial goals, and keep students informed about repayment plans, loan forgiveness, and laws surrounding their options. So a lot of great goals that definitely align with the agenda topics that will be coming up in our future meetings. So thank you all who were able to participate and provide us that information ahead of time. And again, we may ask when we're in this virtual world to help build that team and share information in our virtual platform here, maybe doing more asks in emails. So please be on the lookout for that. Next, we'll be moving to one of our guest speakers, and I'm going to turn it over for introductions at this point.
Great, thank you, Michelle. I've got the pleasure of introducing Dr. Nick Hillman, who's an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Education. His research focuses on the intersection of college access and finance, namely in the area of student financial aid and state higher education finance. His research employs statistical analysis of large, like massive data sets, and he has been published in the field's top academic journals. Dr. Hillman's research has been recognized for excellence by the Association for the Study of Higher Education and the National Association of Student Financial Aid. He's the director of the Student Success Through Applied Research, the STAR Lab, and he's a faculty affiliate at the Center for Financial Security, La Follette School of Public Affairs, and the Institute for Research in Poverty. So quite a stellar background, and he's a super nice guy. So here to welcome, I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Hillman, to help us today learn more about student debt.
Great. Hi there. Thank you for that warm introduction. I appreciate being invited. And my goal, for this whole entire process is just to be a resource for the team. And so in that spirit, I'll share my slides here and get a presentation started. My goal, and you guys can maybe keep time on your, on your own clocks here to see how well I can achieve this. My goal is to hit about 1 slide per minute. You should see the presentation here. And like Kathy said earlier, one of the goals here is to build a common level of community and knowledge. And so in that spirit, that's what this presentation is all about. We're going to talk broadly about sort of how to think about student debt, and then specifically with some data points on student debt in Wisconsin. And if there are any problems with hearing me, or if I sort of disappear, I'm sure Cody and Marco will let me know. So the overview for this presentation is basically these 4 points here. First, we'll start off with a student debt 101, big picture about why do students borrow, where do they get the loans, and so on. Then we'll focus a little bit more specifically on some mechanisms in terms of borrowing and repaying federal loans. And then we'll jump over to the student debt facts and some ideas on policy responses. You don't want to put the cart before the horse, I suppose, but at the same time, there might be some cool ideas here to consider as you move forward in your deliberations. Again, the goal here is to just help the task force pinpoint student debt problems, articulate them, and think about them in ways that can help students now and in the future. So to begin, why do students borrow in the first place? This is a great place to start. I mean, you have $1.5 trillion in debt. It's hard to know where to begin. And so let's start here. And some of this is just kind of obvious, but it's helpful to still discuss. So students borrow to pay for tuition, which is over the long run rising, but also these non-tuition expenses, housing, room, board, caring for dependents, transportation, these other things that help students stay enrolled in college really, really matter. And so loans cover both of those things. Coupling that with the fact that family budgets are constrained, especially right now in a COVID-19 era and in the years to come, the coupling of these two things really are pushing more people to borrow in the first place. On the other side of the sort of financial spectrum, you have financial aid programs, grants, and scholarships that are generous, but over the long run have been losing their purchasing power. They're not paying as much as they used to on average. So these are the main reasons why students are borrowing. And here's one, though, that really is hard to wrestle with, and I hope that the task force does, is that on average, the return on a college investment, the return on investment for your college education is on average positive, returns 7 to 9% each year over the long run. And it's a great investment, and some would argue that student loan debts justify that investment. Now, there are instances when the average does not hold, and those are worth attention. Students can get loans from any number of places. The federal government is the primary one. The free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA form, you're going to hear a lot of jargon and terminology on this task force, I'm certain. So here's a first. We have also loans that come from state governments. Colleges themselves provide loans. Banks and credit unions also lend to students. And so we basically break these up to federal and non-federal loans. The non-federal loans typically are about 10% of the outstanding balance. So they're significant, but not the majority of where students are borrowing. It's primarily through the federal programs. Who borrows? This isn't going to tell you like characteristics of individuals, it's just broadly on federal loan programs. Undergraduate students borrow, graduate students borrow, parents of undergraduates borrow, but to get a federal loan, and financial aid experts on the task force can clarify these and correct me if I'm not giving enough nuance in any of this, but got to be a degree-seeking student or certificate-seeking student enrolled at least part-time at an accredited institution that's recognized by the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education, participating in Title IV. That's another terminology here. Title IV of the Higher Education Act is where the federal loans come from. So you have all these conditions. You have to also be a U.S. citizen to get federal loans. So all these conditions apply in terms of who borrows, who's eligible to borrow. And when they do, when a student does borrow, like myself, when I was a student, and many of us, it sounds like, on this task force possibly, you can borrow in a number of different programs, and the total amount that's outstanding is, as we said, $1.5 trillion. The next 2 points here are kind of technical. I teach an intro to stats class, so just kind of bear with me. On average, if you were to sum up the average student loan debt of that 1.5 trillion across 45 million people, it's about $35,397. That's the average. So you sum every dollar up, you divide it by the total number of people, you get that number. Now, if you lined up every single person who has a loan, you line all 45 million people up, the person directly in the middle is the median. And that person would hold $18,366. So a very different number. You're going to hear different numbers thrown at you all the time. And just like how we measure family income, we oftentimes we don't talk about the average family income, we talk about median because incomes are so skewed. Same is true with student loan debt. Student loan debt will vary depending on how long a student enrolls. If you're in one semester, you're not going to have a lot of debt. If you enroll for 4 years, 5 years, pursue graduate school, you'll have a lot. And so there are also federal limits on how much you can borrow each year. and how much you can borrow in these programs cumulatively. Right now, I guess, as of yesterday, I think these statistics have changed, or will be changing. Federal interest rates range between 4.5 and 6%. My understanding is that yesterday the Treasury note got updated and the loans are probably in the next year ahead going to be closer to 2%. Again, correct me if people are hearing different things. Shifting, hope this isn't too fast, but shifting now to this section 2 on borrowing and repaying federal loans. There are 4 main points to try to wrestle with in this section. First of all, when borrowing and repaying federal loans, there are a number of different federal loan programs available. So undergraduates can borrow. Their loans, if they have financial need, could be subsidized where they're not charged interest while they're enrolled, or they could be unsubsidized where they are. Parents can borrow through what's called the Parent Plus program. Graduate students can borrow in unsubsidized loans, and they can also borrow through the Grad Plus loan program. These are some current major programs at the federal level that have different benefits for different students. So they'll have different interest rates, there'll be different borrowing limits and repayment plans and forgiveness options depending on what types of loan you have. And these are all just the current direct loan programs. There was prior to 2010, a different federal loan program that a lot of people are still repaying under that really complicate the situation. I'm sure the task force will discuss in future sessions. If you were to take all of the loans that are dispersed by public, private, for-profit, nonprofit colleges in Wisconsin, you would have $1.3 billion on the table. And this is data from the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Federal Student Aid. This chart is called a waffle chart. It's sort of the rival of the pie chart. This has 100 squares on it. So if you add up like all the dark red, the ones furthest on the left here, and I'm a little colorblind, so I forgive folks if you can't tell that's dark red, but here about 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29% of all of the loans that are dispersed by Wisconsin institutions are going to undergraduates in the subsidized loan programs. These are federal loans only. Then you sum up the following, the next group, and these are all undergraduate unsubsidized loans. And now this third shade, this sort of more salmon-ish color, I suppose, in the middle here are Parent Plus loans for undergraduates. And this remainder 28 squares here are graduate student loans, whether they're the unsub or whether they're the Grad Plus. The point here, and I'm trying to have these takeaways on some of these slides where I'm throwing a lot of information out there. The point here is that in Wisconsin, 72 cents on the dollar are dispersed to undergraduates in terms of student loans. Parents and graduate students account for a large and growing share of debt in Wisconsin, and these map similar to national trends. So just in our minds, I don't know if you're thinking about an undergraduate, it's good to do that, but also think about graduate students and undergraduate parents. Currently, if a student is borrowing in these federal programs, they have a number of repayment plans ahead of them that they could repay their loans under. Future sessions will discuss these, I believe, but just so you know, there's standard repayment plans. It's sort of a 10-year mortgage style repayment. You've got some income-driven plans that are called income-based repayment, pay-as-you-earn, repay-as-you-earn. Those are all income-driven. And then you have some programs that can extend the length of time through a graduated repayment plan or extended or alternative repayment plan. And just so you know, you can kind of think about them in these four different groups. This is U.S. data. This is not Wisconsin specific. Again, we're lining up 100 people here. Each of these squares represents 1 out of 100. This is U.S. data from U.S. Department of Education. The number of borrowers that are repaying their loans in standard 10-year sort of mortgage style repayment plans, 43 out of 100 are repaying in that type of a plan. About 30 or so are repaying in income-driven plans, and a good chunk, about a quarter, are in some sort of a graduated or extended plan or other plan. So get a sense of the number of people who borrow. You can kind of see that the majority of borrowers are not repaying in these standard plans. And if you add up the money that they owe, well, it looks very different as well. So even though you have a lot of borrowers in standard repayment, they actually account for a pretty small share of the total outstanding volume of federal loans. A bulk of the outstanding volume of federal loans is being repaid through graduated or extended programs or through income-driven plans. The point here is that standard plan, it's not really the norm. A large volume of debt is following these sort of longer-term repayment plans that are connected to income. They could be improved at the federal level by in a number of ways, but the point here is that the period of time that borrowers are repaying has extended. It hasn't been 10 years, it's like an average repayment cycle for probably about 20 years now. So I should say that in a different way. Before the year 2000, it would take borrowers, less than 10 years to repay their loans. Pretty much after 2000, it's taking borrowers, 12, 13 years to repay their loans when they repay them. This is more of a conceptual one. I really apologize that you have to squint here, and these slides will be shared. And the life cycle of loans is a really helpful way as you proceed in your discussions to kind of think about debt and to think about different periods of time when a borrower might be affected by loans, but also to think about interventions and solutions at any point along this continuum. And by no means is this the only thing that matters here. There are a number of other factors here that I'm not even discussing, but we have here sort of before college. Let's think of a sort of traditional aged high school graduate preparing for college. They will gather some information about how to pay for college. They'll financially prepare maybe. They might then apply. They have to apply to a college. They have to then proactively file their FAFSA. And only after they've done those things, then they enroll in a college. You can still file after you've enrolled, but technically, I mean, this is sort of conceptually, just think about this process. Pre-college, there's a lot of stuff that happens even before you enroll. And then once you enroll, the financial aid office will provide you with some information, a financial aid award letter. You'll sign off on a master promissory note. For many borrowers, it's the first time they've ever done this kind of stuff. The student will then have to decide how much to borrow. They'll go through entrance counseling. And if their tuition bill is covered, then the student will see a loan refund. They'll actually see the loan. But a lot of times the loan money pays for tuition bills and a student might not necessarily see it. So again, the professionals can really talk about the practice more, but conceptually, this is really just helpful to think about the process. Students will do this again and again every year as they enroll. They'll refile, they'll rethink about their package and so on. Once they finish college, whether they graduated or left without a degree, they have to go through some sort of an exit counseling. It's easier to do if you can sort of do it when they graduate because you know that they're done. But if a student leaves before graduating, it's hard to do this. The borrower gets connected with their loan servicer. There's this grace period, and then the borrower has to then decide what repayment plan to go into. And like I said, the standard one is 10 years, but a lot of people are not doing that anymore. Then the borrower is in repayment. No longer really has that kind of contact with the university. They get a monthly bill. If they have an emergency, they could file for an emergency protection, whether it's a deferment or forbearance. They can change their repayment plans, and then eventually they'll fully repay their loan or have it forgiven in the best case scenarios. So the point here, though, is that students can be affected by loans long before they ever enroll in college and long after they ever take out that first loan. This is a 20, 30-year long process for people. It's very complicated. And there are large racial and economic inequalities that are baked into every single one of these dots along the way. There are many consequences for defaulting on a loan, and some of the future data points I'm going to throw at you here, we'll talk about loan default. But basically, once a borrower leaves college, starts repaying their loan, if they get behind after 90 days of not making a payment, their loan servicer could report them to a credit agency. And again, experts who are more familiar with this, weigh in, give some nuance here. But after 270 days after that, then the loan will enter into default for these federal loans. And the consequences of default are varied, but primarily it reduces a student's, a borrower. See, I was confused the two. I say students and borrowers interchangeably. I think we should, but the borrower, their credit rating will be damaged. Their wages could be garnished. Their employer could garnish their wages. Their tax refunds could also be withheld. And so there are several consequences even beyond that, but defaulting on a loan is the worst possible option for many borrowers, and it's happening far more often than it could and should be. So I'm gonna take a breath and check time, 20 minutes to go. This is the student debt facts section of the presentation. There will be several different visualizations here that show some data that my team of graduate students, just a wonderful group of students who work in the STAR lab, have helped me collect over the years. And so we're happy to be a resource to share this data. We're trying to move the data out of a PowerPoint into interactive Tableau dashboards for the public, but especially for you on the task force here. And so we're trying to make this data be something you can engage with rather than just passively watch here. So we're mapping the data over those four kind of red circles we just saw: pre-college, during college, after college, and then repayment. So a quick sort of caveat though, my understanding is that there's not really a statewide post-secondary administrative services agency that coordinates and manages and analyzes student loan debt. Of course, HEAB does remarkable work and important work. UW system likewise, and the tech college system likewise. Everybody's got their capacity, and my understanding from my point of view, it doesn't look to me like there's a statewide agency that's really coordinating for student loan debt to get data out there in the public. It makes it really difficult for researchers like me to really measure, monitor, and ultimately make recommendations on how to fix student loan problems in Wisconsin. And so just sort of know that all the data that we're going to look at come from the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, or they come from consumer credit panels. Here is a quick example of one way we can think about data for pre-college interventions in student loan debt. This map shows you, of course, Wisconsin, but each of these dots represents a high school. One of my students, Ellie Brooker, does excellent work every week where she's updating this map by including the number of high schoolers that have completed the FAFSA for the given year. And she just updated this yesterday. So Marshfield High, for example, at random, I just picked it, have 122 students who have completed the FAFSA this year, and it shows over time where that maps out, according to prior years. This data could be useful for helping, identify how to help students apply for the FAFSA and get money to pay for college. Wisconsin has one of the lowest FAFSA filing rates in the country. Even within high poverty school districts, Wisconsin's filing rate is lower than average, one of the lowest. And completing this form can really help students plan for and pay for college and ultimately be successful in college. So that could be something to consider as this task force moves forward. Just as a note, at the bottom of these pages, you can see links. Please use those links. Anyone that says star.wisc.edu is going to take you to an interactive dashboard. Now, when it comes to students who are enrolled in college, that previous one is looking at high schoolers preparing for college. This one is looking at students once they're enrolled. It's going to include undergraduates, graduates, it doesn't matter. And this data comes from the Office of Federal Student Aid. It's the loan volume reports that they report quarterly. And the black line here on the top represents the UW system. All UW system schools, these numbers are adjusted for inflation. It shows the dollar volume that schools are dispersing every year in federal loans. And so you kind of squint, 600 million-ish is where the UW system was last observed in 2018-19. They were dispersing about $600 million in student loan debt. This greenish second line here is the nonprofit, so the YQ institutions. I'm not sure how this maps over with membership technically, but nonprofit institutions here are dispersing around almost $500 million. The Wisconsin Technical College system is dispersing maybe around 100 million. The for-profits in Wisconsin are not dispersing a lot of federal student loans. And so you add all this up and it sums up to $1.3 billion. And I think the takeaway that's pretty interesting here is that these map over with enrollment trends because the only way you can get a loan is if you enroll in college. And so of course they're going to map over, but public colleges, they enroll about 80% of students in Wisconsin. They disperse about 60% of the debt. And so, think about sort of different points in the sectors where debt trends might be looking different depending on different types of institutions. This chart here, I'll orient you to it first. And again, I tried to squeeze as much as I could in here, but this is taking data from the college scorecard, the U.S. Department of Education's college scorecard. And what we're looking at is each of these dots represent one of the 100 colleges and universities in the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin enrolls, about, 350,000 students. There are 100 institutions. They're all plotted over here. So you can imagine there's just a number of different experiences and patterns here that you could explore. But on the vertical axis right here, it goes from 0 up to 40,000. This is the median debt of a completer, somebody who finishes their degree. What's the median amount that individual owed upon completion? And here on the bottom, on the horizontal axis, it shows what percentage of students are borrowing. And so you can see, for example, that one cluster of schools is kind of up here. These are your four-year institutions. Students are borrowing, anywhere between $20,000 and $30,000. And then down here, basically your tier institutions, when students complete, they owe, between $7,500 and $15,000. But the idea here is that there's a lot of noise in this graph. There's not a big clustering, at least not that I see. And so median debt, it ranges between $7,500 to $35,000. The share of students who are even exposed to debt in the first place can be a low of some colleges only expose 10% of their students to debt. Others expose 100. Debt varies just considerably. And so this is kind of to a next point I want to try to make here. On repayment, this is now looking at sort of the outstanding debt on average that all Wisconsin borrowers hold. And so nationwide, we've mentioned 1.5 trillion outstanding. This is only for federal student loans here. And if you add up all of the people who have federal student loans in Wisconsin, you're going to have about 710,000 people. They could have been in repayment for 1 year. They could be in repayment for 10 or 20 years. They might have finished college. They might not. It's going to include everybody here. You add up all their debt. It's about $22 billion for federal loans. That sums out to about $30,901 for Wisconsin. And that puts Wisconsin below the U.S. average. Doesn't mean we don't have problems, but just for context, that's sort of where we stand right now. And there's going to be a federal resource coming out soon that's going to allow us to look at state-specific samples so we can dig into that number, I think, even further. It's called the NIPSAS survey. And so more data are to come, but the point here is that this is an average number, and there's a lot happening around the average. Just like we saw in the previous chart, there's a lot of noise in terms of individual colleges. Same is true with borrowers. And so hang with me for just a second here. This chart might look a little weird at first, but it's going to make sense soon. We're going to see here an axis here. It goes from 0 to 0 and is in the middle. So like right here is about 10%. Here's about 20% where my mouse is right now. And so if you add up all the borrowers, all those 710,000 borrowers in Wisconsin, about 18% of them fall into this group right here of students who owe less than borrowers who owe less than $5,000. And so another way to say this is like 18% of Wisconsin borrowers owe less than $5,000. And because they have relatively small loans, they account for a relatively small share of the total $22 billion outstanding. They account for, I think that's like 1% or so, this sort of lighter color of red. And so hopefully this will make sense once you see a couple more of these. About 15% owe between 5 and 10,000. About 23% owe between 10 and 20,000. If you add up these three buckets, you're talking about 54% of Wisconsin borrowers. So the majority of Wisconsin borrowers owe less than $20,000, and their outstanding debts, if you add up these three little red ones on the right side, their outstanding debt only accounts for 16% of the state's total. This gets important because we have a group of people in the middle who borrow 20 to 40,000, and they owe, that's a sizable share. But down here at the bottom, you've got very small percentages of borrowers who borrow a whole lot of debt. These bottom four, if I can get my mouse to kind of show up, these bottom four represent only 13% of borrowers, but they hold 50% of the state's debt. And so as you work through as a task force, averages can really, really mislead us if we only talk about average debt. We need to look at the full distribution of debt, look at medians and averages. And you'll probably see that there's a lot going on here that is going to be important for thinking about pinpointing and solving problems. Averages are sensitive to skewness. Use medians, complement with medians as you can. Most borrowers carry relatively small. I'm not saying that that's not a problem. There are huge problems with small loans, but most borrowers do carry smaller loans, and few carry these large ones. There's a tool here where we've provided this on our Star Lab website. You can go in, you can link to consumer credit data, and you can look at the median student loan debt across different metropolitan statistical areas around Wisconsin. So we'd encourage you to check that out. We'll try to make this more accessible and available for the team here, but there's a lot of variation that's happening around the state where some metro areas have different median debt than others. And there's some trends here that you can explore each over time here. And these are all for Wisconsin metro areas. Similarly, we've got a tool here that you can look at delinquency rates. These are again tied to the consumer credit report data. You can look at delinquency rates across these same metro areas over time, and you can disaggregate these by a number of different characteristics, but about 12.7% of Wisconsin borrowers are delinquent on their loans. That's below the national average, but it doesn't mean it's not a problem. Statewide rates range considerably across metro areas. And you can also cut this by age, by credit scores, and by the income of the borrower's census tract. And so again, this particular data point, though, it's using credit panel data, so this includes both federal and non-federal debt. A couple more slides to share, and then we're going to transition to some policy discussion. In terms of loan repayment, this is the student loan default rate over 5 years. So after a student enters repayment, you track them for 5 years. This was usually you just do this for 3 years, but this was a request that the Center for American Progress made to look at these numbers at 5 years out. And across the state, about 11.8% of borrowers are defaulting on their federal loans within 5 years of entering repayment. And those numbers vary considerably. 5% for the nonprofit sector. For the UW system, it's around 5.8. It goes up to 20 to 23% in the tech college and for-profit sectors. And so not shown here is that the median amount that a borrower defaults on in Wisconsin is $9,000. So most borrowers are defaulting on relatively small debts. And think about that distribution we just looked at. These small debt borrowers really have some struggling issues that can be addressed. The tech colleges and the for-profit sector account for about 70% of all the defaults that happen within 5 years. And so again, pinpointing problems, this might be helpful if you're interested in default. So here's some key indicators: 710,000 borrowers, 30 grand in debt for Wisconsin, but the median is far lower in Wisconsin, 17,323. The default rate hovers around 11%. When a student defaults on their loan, the median is about 9,000. It's relatively small loans, and the delinquency is 12%. But keep in mind, when you're interpreting these statistics, these are not disaggregated by race, ethnicity, college completion, the college where the student enrolled, you name it. There's a lot more we could explore here. It's really, really helpful to sort of have this as a starting point at least. So 7 minutes to go. I think I can do this. So thinking about policy responses now, and this is really just like a back of the envelope. It seems to stick, but hopefully it's going to be useful for the committee, or for the task force, but don't feel like this is the only way to think about this particular visualization. If we put current and future borrowers in the center of our thinking, there are at least 4 ways we can really support them. The first one is, of course, on consumer protections. I see a lot of states moving in this direction. I think there's some promising ideas with each of these that are listed here. You could have, for example, a student loan bill of rights. You could have a student loan ombudsman who's really advocating for borrowers' rights. You could have financial wellness and literacy all along the borrowing spectrum, even before and after a loan, and of course, better consumer information. These are like kind of the go-to policy responses because they're usually not as expensive as some other ones, and they're really important, but they're a necessary but insufficient solution to any debt problem. And so when we sort of think about, well, what else can we do? What else could the task force recommend? In terms of data and practice, it would be wonderful, and this is my bias as a researcher, it'd be wonderful to have some administrative services agency that really has agreements across the board where we're linking student loan records across, not just across the systems, but across the whole entire state of anybody who's borrowing federal, non-federal loans, you name it. Really getting that infrastructure in place will help with ongoing assessment. There could be ways to build communities of practice for technical assistance, learning lessons with and across institutions. I know WASPA does a great job of convening professionals, but community-based organizations should be in those mixes too. And I know there's some great examples happening in the state. And this will help us evaluate these promising practices and help students in the long run. Of course, to fix debt problems is a fundamentally finance problem. Tuition policy matters, but also funding the public institutions through appropriations, making sure that colleges have the capacity to serve their students well and keep the lid on tuition and support students so they can be successful in college, and money matters for all of that. There are ideas around the table about refinancing loans at the state level. There could be some states have experimented with tax credits for loan repayment. and just general loan relief options. So these have to do more with subsidies and money rather than information and data. And of course, you have the regulatory environment, you have state authorization, program approval. There could be ways to enhance reporting and oversight of institutions or of lenders, you name it. You could probably think of a million things, but the idea here is that all these together should hopefully provide some structure to really support current and future borrowers. Hopefully gives you some ideas to work with. Maybe you chop some of these off, maybe you don't like these ideas. You can certainly add to them, but hopefully this helps the task force, frame their thinking. And so here's a quick conclusion. Hopefully I've not sped through this too quickly, but if the goal here is to just help the task force pinpoint some problems, then I think that these are some takeaways. First of all, the data infrastructure is really necessary to be able to identify and ultimately improve on student loan outcomes in Wisconsin. Again, the data that I've been using here that you've seen all comes from the U.S. Department of Education. It's publicly accessible data. Some of it comes from credit reports. That's also public data in aggregate. And so we're going to try to continue to pull this public data as best we can and provide it as a resource to the task force and to the public generally. But also, when possible, we need to be disaggregating data by geography, by race, ethnicity, degree completion, and a number of other factors. We really want to pinpoint problems in student lending and student loan repayment. That's kind of on the data side. Thinking more about sort of the implication side, the impacts of debt, it's really hard to at least academically, to measure the impact of something, because we're not randomly assigning loans to people. That's the way that academics would try to find cause and effect. They would randomly assign somebody to a treatment. That doesn't happen in student loan debt and never will. And because of that, it's hard to say, well, debt is causing something else. And certainly when there's smoke, there's fire. There's a lot of things that are happening, but just kind of, I'm always skeptical whenever we talk about causal claims in student loan debt, only because we're not, randomly assigning loans to people, and doesn't mean that there aren't causal effects, but I always pause. I also think that a really important thing here to think about is that these low debt borrowers tend to not complete college, so now they have debt but no degree. They face very different challenges in repayment than do high debt borrowers. We saw that 13% of borrowers in Wisconsin hold 50% of the debt. They have really, really high debt levels. More than likely, these individuals went to graduate school, doctors and lawyers, for example, and certainly they have their own challenges too in terms of repayment. I'm not saying that's a chump change, but they have different challenges than the student who borrowed and didn't complete. So articulating what is their problem is really going to be helpful. Again, just kind of broad generalization here, but colleges and regions have very different loan outcomes that warrant attention. So sort of tailoring the discussion around specific sectors or specific regions might be useful. Better information, as I mentioned earlier, it's necessary. Certainly going to help, but it's going to be insufficient if we're going to solve debt problems in Wisconsin. And whatever the solutions end up being should be certainly simple and personalized and easy for borrowers to navigate, because it's challenging to navigate this system on the front end as a pre-college student, but also during college and then far into repayment. It's hard to navigate, especially when you're economically vulnerable. And so I hope that this presentation can at least kind of give some guidance, some sort of parameters from at least my vantage point that hopefully can be helpful as you go on in your deliberations. Please reach out anytime. And like I said, the STAR Lab, we're going to try our best to get some of that public data out there to just make it more usable for you all and for the public. So I really appreciate your time, and I'll pause then for questions.
Thank you so much for that overview and detailed information, Nick. We have had some questions come in while you were on various slides. And as a reminder to task force members, if you have a question, please use the chat feature of the WebEx. But I'm going to go through some of these, Nick. I think some of your future slides may have covered this information in high level, but if you want to expand on anything, please do. So when you were back on the life cycle of loans and the slide, I think it was around slide 12 or 13, have you completed a chart or analysis on the delinquency or default by repayment type as it relates to
No, no, if I'm understanding that question correctly, there are different repayment plans that borrowers can be in. And so if a borrower is in, for example, some sort of income-driven plan, it's possible that they don't owe on a monthly basis, and that could protect them from entering default. And so it'd be interesting to break out repayment by the repayment plan. We're not able to see that with the data that we have, unfortunately.
Okay, and then an immediate following question in the same areas, is there a comparative analysis on private student loans as it relates to debt burdens, repayment, delinquency, and default?
No, there's not. These have focused only on, the data focused primarily on federal loans, but getting private loan data is pretty tricky. It's possible to do, but you get it typically through credit panels. I'm not even sure if you can differentiate between federal and non-federal loans there. So I haven't seen studies that dig into the private loans in great depth, but the answer to that question was no.
Okay, thank you. For any who were not necessarily following the chat, when you were talking about the FAFSA, one comment or questions that kind of went through or added information was that he have approached DPI in regards to trying to have the FAFSA form be a requirement to fill out, as other states have that. So there has been an approach, but the COVID-19 has interrupted that conversation there. Then there was, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Michelle. I just, sorry to interrupt. On that point, I think that that's really interesting. There are a couple of states that are doing that already. Louisiana, I believe, was one of the early ones. Tennessee, I believe, is doing it. California might be considering it. I think one thing, though, to really just sort of point out is that the Wisconsin grant, as far as I understand, is kind of a first come, first serve thing. And so, yes, it would be nice to have everybody filing, but it also seems like if that's the model, if I'm understanding the grant correctly, and I could be wrong, I know that some of the other states have been running into this problem of like, uh-oh, the money ran out, or it's hard to stretch thin. And again, my student, Ellie Brooker, has been doing some really interesting work in this area, and I'm happy to connect her with folks if needed.
Great. And the added comment there is that that's correct. It is a first come, first serve. So to support what you're saying there. And then there was a question of, do you know the percent of graduates that have student debt? There was a response provided by Jeff Brandt that 72% of UW system graduates have debt at graduation. So do you know the percent of graduates that have student debt upon graduation?
I love that question because my team and I, we were trying to answer that, and we couldn't answer it with the data we have. You're going to see the Institute for College Access and Success, TICAS. They put out a really helpful report every year. They're a useful organization. They put out this report on the debt of graduating seniors, and that kind of helps answer that question. But one of the challenges you'll see with that report is that it's not a representative sample of the state. I believe that in their most recent data, they only have data for 17 of the state's, 40 or so colleges. And so it doesn't tell you the full story. And we haven't been able to successfully back into it yet. However, not to just be doom and gloom, the NPSAS survey, the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study, is a federal survey that's going to be now a statewide representative sample. And so it should be, when the new NPSAS 18 administrative cycle comes out, that data should be able to answer that question.
Oh, great, good news. As you can see, they're very data-driven questions, and that was one of the shared goals comments that we received, explore and get data and trends. So these questions definitely align. I think you answered this in your conclusion as well, but I want to put it out there. Is there a correlation between degree completion and default?
Yes, there is a strong correlation between the two. That's sort of two things are happening here. On one hand, the majority of students who default don't have degrees. And still, people can default even when they have a degree, and I want to talk about that for a second, but that is absolutely the case. And it's coupled with unemployment. And so it's like this sort of domino effect. Now you have debt, but you don't have a credential, so you don't have that boost in the labor market, and maybe you don't even find a job. And so now you sort of, you have this debt hanging over you with neither the degree or the new job. And so unemployment is a big point here. And I don't know, this might be naive of me, but if there could be a way to connect unemployment insurance records with student loan records, we could do some really cool things in terms of proactive outreach and identifying, people who are very likely to be in trouble of defaulting. But I also want to say, on the flip side of this, there's a really important study. Judith Scott Clayton, a professor at Columbia, has been analyzing 20 years of repayment for a national sample of students. And so what she found is that these students who all got bachelor's degrees, they all finished. But Black borrowers in particular, when compared to white borrowers, even with the same degree, were not paying down their debts in the long term at the same rate. And many borrowers who are borrowers of color, and especially in Black communities, are not paying down student debts at the same rate. And there are a number of reasons why, largely related to structural racism, I would have to imagine, but also just intergenerational inequality. And so I think that it's complex. Even when a student defaults on their loan, they are defaulting even on degrees, and it's largely driven from social factors as well.
Thank you so much for your time and your information and expertise in sharing with the task force today. And in the interest of our agenda and moving forward, I'm going to do a little interruption because it seems as though we have fixed some technical difficulties, and I want to give Representative Ballweg an opportunity to do her introduction, and then we'll move to our next speaker. So Representative Ballweg, if you are still with us, if you could say hello.
I am, and do you hear me this time?
Yes, quite clearly.
Awesome. So I just wanted to mention that, yes, my district is the 41st. It goes from Ripon over to Wisconsin Dells. I've been in the legislature now 16 years, and the Colleges and Universities Committee is the one committee I've been on every term since I've been in the legislature. Back in 2010, I actually worked with Connie and some of the other folks online, where we led with Senator Risser. I led a summer study committee on the review of higher education financial aid programs. I also serve as a commissioner on the Midwest Higher Education Compact. So I have been trying to pay attention to a lot of these issues for a very long time, and appreciate being part of the task force.
Thank you, and I'm glad we were able to get you to have this introduction today. So thank you for joining. All right, and now we will move to our next presenter, and I'll hand the baton back over to Secretary Blumenfeld.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Nick, for a wonderful presentation. It was very informative, and I know that there's a lot of data behind that for those that are data junkies and want to get their fingers in the data. I'd like to now turn to introducing Seth Frontman, who is one of the nation's leading experts on the intersection between higher education finance, consumer protection, and public policy. Seth previously served as the Assistant Director and Student Loan Ombudsman for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, where he led a government-wide effort to develop consumer-driven policy reforms and protect millions of Americans with student debt. Seth joined CFPB as part of the Treasury implementation team as senior advisor, and he has worked with the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, and was Deputy Chief of Staff for Representative Patrick Murphy from Pennsylvania. Prior to his work on federal policy, Seth served as counsel for the New Jersey State Senate, where he worked on state-level consumer protection legislation. Seth's work on behalf of student loan borrowers has appeared in national print publications and broadcast media, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, National Public Radio, Washington Post, and I've had the great pleasure of meeting and working with you, Seth, so really appreciate you and coming to help us talk about the impact of COVID on the student debt issues. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Seth Frontman.
Can you guys hear me okay now? Good. So thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm really honored to be part of such a great group, and thank you so much for your leadership, Secretary. it's always dangerous to go after Professor Hillman and trying to figure out what you could say that he did not cover better than you could ever think about, but I'm going to try. I think I have the caveat here is that I think I am overly eager to help you all in any way I can. So I think my slides cover probably not only the topic at hand today, but veer quite a bit into what is likely the consumer protection piece. But I'm going to focus on the front end, but hopefully those are also helpful as you think through that as well. So I think mostly, I think what I hope to present on today and leave you all with is that we all should have been scared about the state of the student loan market and the impact it was having on millions of Americans before the COVID crisis. And as we think through at a national level and in particular at a state level, just how concerned I think we all should be about the state of people in Wisconsin with student debt, how they were struggling before, and what the economic fallout of the virus and the associated economic crisis will be. So just a couple stats to help add some color onto Professor Hillman's remarks is this is essentially what the last decade and a half looks like across consumer finance. When you compare nearly all of the other products that exist where consumers take on debt before, it is just striking the extent to which we have seen the growth of student loans. So there's now nearly $1.7 trillion of student loan debt in America, and it has grown in a rate that just puts all of the rest of consumer products just so surpasses them to such an extent. It's actually quite remarkable. And so I think the question we often get, I think Professor Hillman covered this well, is how did we get here? And I think what you see is a lot more people taking on a lot more debt. Over the course of my career, I think I've sometimes heard from people talk about how, we shouldn't necessarily be that concerned about student loan debt because it is just an indicator of more people accessing higher education. And obviously there is some truth to that. I think you see a tremendous growth of the number of people taking on debt, but that obviously isn't the entirety of the story, where you also see that those people are also forced to take on just a considerably more amount of it to access higher education, ultimately leading to a place where more than 1 in 5 American consumers now have a student loan. So another fact that we often hear, and I think Professor Hillman touched on this well, was a lot of student loan borrowers only have small amounts of student debt. And again, there's obviously some truth to that. But nearly every day that goes by, we see that kind of calculus changes. So now this is again across America, not specific to Wisconsin, that there are now nearly 8 million borrowers who owe more than $50,000 and more than 16.5 million borrowers who owe more than $25,000. And unfortunately, what you see is in the past, traditionally, those borrowers have been doing quite well. Like there are obviously a ton of concerns about people having that much consumer debt, but at least in terms of their ability to pay it back, those were the least likely to default. But the New York Fed has done a considerable amount of work here documenting how even kind of high balance borrowers, we're seeing their balances and their household balance sheets really deteriorate. And again, this is all pre-crisis. So another thing which I think you often hear is how the student debt crisis was driven by, just a bunch of millennials eating too much avocado toast or whatever the meme is you see on social media. And nothing could be further from the truth. Student debt is actually quite an intergenerational burden. We've seen how student debt amongst older borrowers are actually the fastest growing segment of student loan borrowers. And I think what this chart demonstrates is that borrowers who are over the age of 50 actually owe almost 3 times more than borrowers who are 24 years of age or less. And, you know, we hear about this all the time, and I think one thing to think about as you think through the consumer protection challenges is the reasons why, both borrowers taking out loans on behalf of themselves, but also being forced to co-sign on behalf of children or grandchildren. And I think one other thing to flag, which I think I really admire the goals of the task force, is to think about how student debt is having a larger implication across the state. And, you know, one of the things that really concerns me is just the amount of debt we are forcing older Americans to bring into their retirement years. And that's not specific to student loans. You know, I think you see that in mortgage and credit cards, even in auto debt. And, you know, we just need to be thinking about how, you know, you don't often think about student loan debt as a retirement security issue. But more and more, these are the types of questions that we need to be asking to try to get the full holistic picture about the true cost that student debt is having both nationally and within the state. So I don't think that I necessarily have much to add on the Wisconsin specific stuff from Professor Hillman, but I did want to flag some of the numbers that we dug up from the Federal Reserve, which shows the number of borrowers in the state of Wisconsin who are above the age of 60. So there's now, you know, over 58,000 borrowers over the age of 60 in the state of Wisconsin, nearly a 50% increase over just 5 years. Hopefully we'll get updated data on that. That data is a little old, but that came out of the CFPB. And you also see, you know, thousands and thousands of older Wisconsin borrowers in delinquency. And as a point of comparison amongst your neighbors, you see trailing Michigan in terms of borrowers and IDR, but you know, still some work to be done. So another thing that I've seen, so I've traveled to many states and talked to many people about student debt over the last 5 or so years, and I think that there's a common misperception that student debt is some sort of a urban or suburban issue. And again, I think that that somewhat conventional wisdom kind of detracts from kind of the true scope of how student debt is impacting all of us. And there's now starting to be more and more research which shows the significant impact that student debt is having on rural areas. So the Federal Reserve Board of DC actually did a study which showed that, you know, student debt is actually driving out migration from rural counties. As more and more people take on student debt, they wind up moving out of rural areas. And also the people with student debt who remain in rural areas struggle to a significant extent. And I think here's a great map that's not as good as Professor Hillman's stuff, but still pretty good, called Mapping Student Debt, where you could put up any zip code in America and you could track how much student debt there is, and then also the distress. And I think, you know, this map obviously means a lot more to all of you, but you could see how the delinquencies and distress of student debt kind of extend to not only, you know, the big cities, but also the rural part of the state. And I think just one more piece to focus on are consumer complaints. So, you know, borrowers are able to file complaints with my former employer, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And, you know, since they opened their complaint portal, nearly 1,000 student loan borrowers have filed a complaint about getting shoddy or bad servicing or collection practices from their student loan company. So I'm going to touch on this a little more, but just in terms of data points, realizing that there is a consumer protection piece to this. So very quickly here, I think why we should be worried and why this was a crisis before the student debt, before we ever heard about Corona. I think this is one of the scariest charts that I've seen, and we kind of take this around to kind of get people to open up their eyes to what's happening in the student loan market. So what you see is that, you know, it's weird to talk about it now, but a tremendous growth of delinquencies amongst all consumer financial products during the last crisis. But nearly all of them reverted to their pre-recession norms, just a couple months ago, except for the student loan market, where we saw a lagging in terms of the amount of delinquencies and the amount of borrowers who are behind as people went back to school. There was just an inherent lag in grace periods and deferments, but ultimately the crisis really hit and student loan delinquencies shot up in around Q2 of 2012. And unlike any other product, just never went back down. So we really entered the current crisis where student loan borrowers were significantly struggling at rates much higher than mortgage holders, credit card holders, you name it. And then this stat shows the number of borrowers who defaulted on their loans last year as a comparison to the number of people who lost their home to foreclosures, just for some dramatic effect here. And I think what you see is for all of the years that we have data, which is embarrassingly little, there's been more than 1 million federal student loan borrowers who defaulted on their loans. We actually saw quite a significant uptick just last year to now 1.2 million borrowers who defaulted on their loans. So if you kind of do the math, it means that every 26 seconds of every single day, another borrower actually defaulted on their loans. And again, all of this data is before we found out that tens of millions of Americans lost their jobs. So what has Washington's response been to the financial crisis? And I'm going to run through some of this stuff, but I think the main top level takeaway that I hope to leave you with is, I think that there's been some overly optimistic, some concerning reports that kind of Washington, D.C. has stepped in and solved the student debt crisis for the near future. And that's not to take away from some significant steps that they have. But I think what I want to walk through is just why, if you all were worried about student debt before, there is no reason to think that the situation has gotten any better and actually has gotten substantially worse. So what steps have Congress taken? So obviously the most significant thing that they have done is essentially pause all federal student loan payments. To be actually 100% precise, what they did was for any loan the federal government holds, which is around $1.3 trillion of it, they said for the next few months, borrowers don't have to make payments and no interest will accrue. They essentially, in the most positive light, I think what they did was just put a pause on everyone's payments. I think in the most, the most suspect way, I think they essentially kind of kicked the can down the road about thinking about student loans till October 1st, but we'll get there. I think the other thing they did was both the administration and Congress has seized all of the extraordinary collection tactics that the federal government has if you fall behind on your student loan. So if you become seriously delinquent on your federal student loan, the government can come in and seize your Social Security benefits, take away your earned income tax credit, even without a court order, go to your employer and start seizing a pretty significant portion of their wages. Again, that was supposed to be paused, but we'll get to this. So essentially, to sum up, I think what Congress did was for all of the debt that essentially taxpayers are on the hook for, that the federal government holds, which again is around 1.3 of the nearly $1.7 trillion, was just put a pause on this through September. So here are the issues that I think you are forced to still grapple with. Is the first one is there is over $300 billion of outstanding student loan debt that was not touched at all by the CARES Act the passage of the CARES Act and the executive branch action. So it doesn't touch any private student loans. We have like a significant report out there. If you guys are interested, I could share, that just shows how significant private student debt has become, even if it seems so much smaller than the federal student loans. It doesn't touch any of the older bank-based federally guaranteed loans, which many borrowers who are old like me continue to have. And it doesn't have any guaranteed protection for Perkins loans. So again, there are a lot of borrowers who have gotten no help from Washington on their student debt. I think the next problem is the implementation of this has been just really suspect. So despite the fact that borrowers aren't supposed to get their wages garnished, there was a lawsuit in full disclosure that we were part of because now 54,000 people continue to get their wages seized despite Congress saying it should stop. If you look on social media at all, you see borrowers just struggling to access the pause or the credit protections. And then again, private student loan borrowers are just really struggling. We saw private student loan companies still going to court to get collection lawsuits, still collecting, and some suspect practices. But I think the most important thing for you all to keep in mind is that September 30th isn't all that far away. And on that day, the Department of Education and its handful of student loan companies are responsible for turning back on 35 million accounts. And I think what really concerns me is we have kind of seen this before, where this is kind of what happens during after natural disasters like hurricanes, where the government will shut off payments and then try to turn them back on. And what we have seen time and time again is that borrowers just head out of this pause and just end up considerably worse. There are borrowers whose account gets turned back on who can't pay. There are borrowers struggling but never get enrolled in the right repayment plan. So I think this is like a key thing for you all to kind of circle on your calendar and to start thinking about the impact it's going to have on the state. So a couple of things that I'm just, again, I think I have a whole other presentation about consumer protection, but I just want to make a couple points that Professor Hillman raised too, which is I think I also view the opportunities for states to step up kind of in the same relative bucket. And I'm happy to talk about any and all of these with the task force, obviously in consumer protection. So I'm going to shamelessly use my last couple of minutes to kind of pitch the importance of this as well. Is you have seen states really grappling with how to get more involved in tackling the student debt crisis. And they have really landed on consumer protection as just a critical component of this. And I think Professor Hillman was right in that in a lot of ways it presents a perfect option because it is not states trying to figure out how to shell out a whole lot of money to do forgiveness. But I think the other thing that I would fall back on is it also just fits in their traditional role of states just being really important watchdogs over consumer financial markets and consumer financial protection companies, which I think we often forget is the flip side of the student debt crisis, which is there are a whole lot of financial companies, many of which are good players. And I was excited to hear from some of the folks who are part of the task force who we've worked with for a long time. But then there are also players who have time and time again proven that they view the student debt crisis as kind of their chance to get rich. And I think this extends across the life cycle that Professor Hillman presented of a student loan, from big banks making originations to servicers to collectors to relief scams to credit reporting agencies, kind of you name it. So we just put together a list of, here are just some of the examples of companies that have recently been sued for taking advantage of student loan companies. And you could see that they kind of run the gamut. So I'm not going to run through all of this, but I just wanted to kind of remind you all not like you all need reminding, that I think the flip side of the student debt crisis is a consumer protection crisis. But I also think it's one where there's been a lot of common ground. I think one of the main takeaways that I was hoping to leave you all with was that, you know, in many ways, states, unlike Washington, have found a way to tackle the student debt crisis in a really kind of apolitical, bipartisan manner. And I think because they've landed on one of the ideas is, you know, regardless of how we got into this mess, or like where your take is about who is at fault, I think we have come to a shared understanding that if you took on debt to chase the American dream, to get a better life for you and your family, that you shouldn't be ripped off in the process. And I think that is just like a really central tenet to what I've heard from borrowers. The concerns that I've heard from families is just this fear of kind of, how did I end up where I was? Like, how did I get ripped off when I did everything I was supposed to do? So I was excited to see some of the consumer protection focus on the out meetings, and I won't run through all the rest of this, but I think it's really important work. And I think just two more points I wanted to make before questions were, I think the number one point, which I hope came through, was I think you all are on this task force because you were concerned about the student loan borrowers in your state and the impact that student debt was having before the Corona crisis. And, you know, I think your work and the importance of helping these borrowers and kind of the millions more after we're dealing with the fallout is just going to be even more critical. I think the second point is, I've heard from a lot of people, no one obviously on this task force, that, you know, Washington made the student debt crisis mess, and like, let's let them fix it. And maybe was invited here to kind of relay one message, which is, you know, Washington has and never will address this. I think that states really need to try to step up and figure out how they could protect their folks, because they are on the front lines and see every day that the true impact that student debt is having. But I think the final thing I just wanted to touch on, and I think Professor Hillman did this well, is when we talk about tackling the student debt crisis, we just can't be talking about eliminating or alleviating the student debt burden kind of for the next cohort of people, for the next incoming class. You know, there are 45 million Americans who get a student loan bill each month now. You know, there's over 700,000 in your state. And the solutions, you know, need to also figure out how we help them and how we provide them some relief and some protections. And, you know, we can't just sacrifice their financial futures to try to get this right the next time. So I think with that, I'd love to answer any questions. Hopefully I didn't go too much over on my time.
Thank you very much, Seth, for your presentation and all that information. And in the interest of time, we do have time for one question. That one question did come in from a task force member during your presentation, and it indicates, in the consideration of the total amount of debt from all areas, is the assumption that student debt is the highest because there are fewer eligibility requirements in comparison to mortgages, credit cards, etc.?
So it's a great question. You know, I think one of the challenges that everyone has faced, which you all will face, is that for the last decade or so, we have just been really reliant on consumer debt as the main tool to drive access to higher education, right? And we have done so in a way that I think, this is just obviously my personal opinion, that has just really undervalued the true cost that debt was having both on individuals and society. So I think a lot of the checks that we have normally put in place on access just don't exist in this market. So the question is a good one. You know, there are no real underwriting standards to take out a student loan, which means a lot more people get it and a lot more people get debt. And that has been allowed because it is the way that we allow people to go to college who aren't rich in this country. And so sometimes you will hear saying we just need to deal with the student debt crisis by kind of tightening up the lending standards and letting less people take on this debt load. But that doesn't solve the actual issue of access to higher education in America is important. And if we are not providing a non-debt fueled way to do so, then we are just dramatically limiting the doors of higher education to Americans. So I think this is like just an enormous challenge, and I'm not sure if you guys kind of assume this under the mantle, which is if we are going to be focused on eliminating or dramatically reducing student debt going forward, one, how do you quantify and make the case that that is important by demonstrating what the cost of student debt is? But then also, what is the alternative that is being presented so, people like me and people I know would still be able to access, higher education or graduate degrees. And I think this is like a really thorny issue, but I think why I'm hopeful is, the, task force like this and kind of the efforts like you guys, is really a new phenomenon to try to get all of the right people in the state together, all of the different stakeholders, and realize that the current trajectory we are on is just like unsustainable. And I think the questions that have come up today, and I think, with folks like the secretary and Professor Hillman, I think, trying to truly understand the tools and leverage the state has, and then really, I just want to go back to this idea, like really trying to dig into what is the true cost of debt-fueled higher education, so that when you go to the governor, when you're talking to the legislature, people just have a really good sense about the trade-offs. And there's going to be much harder ones in light of the crisis. So I think the work you guys are doing is just incredibly important.
Thank you for that response. And we're going to go to our break immediately following this, and I don't want to eat into that. And we have our guest speakers after break, our debt holders. But there is one timely question that I wonder if you are able to give a quick response to it. It might be too early to ask this question. A second question came in, but I think we're going to cover it in future agendas, so I'm going to hold on that one. But any data on if students have applied for more student loans in the last 2 months to help pay expenses during COVID, because many students are considered dependents over the age of 17, so they do not qualify for stimulus checks. Do you have a short response to that in regards, or is it too early to know?
So I can take that back. I haven't seen data, but I will take that back and figure out if I could track that down and if we've seen it. My guess is it's probably too early to tell, but I could take that as a homework assignment and get back to the group on if it's helpful.
That would be great and much appreciated as well. So we're going to take our break at this point in time, in a 10-minute break. So please be back in your seats by 12:25, if you will. It's kind of more like an 8-minute break, but enough time to go get a cup of coffee, refresh your water, soda, bathroom break, whatever you need, stretch those legs. We'll reconvene at 12:25 with our student debt holders, and we'll put our break slide up and mute the microphones at this point. And thank you very much, everyone. give a 1-minute warning for everyone to get settled back in for our next agenda items. Right, it's 12:25. If we can have people come back to their meeting seats, if they will. Get started with our next item. Is some of our student debt holder speakers.
All right, I'm happy to introduce Bree Stadler. This is Secretary Blumenfeld. Bree is entering her 8th year as a teacher. And despite working 3 jobs as a student and receiving scholarships, Bree graduated college with $45,000 of debt. She anticipates she will continue making payments until 2029, after 19 years of teaching. So here to share her real life story is Bree Stadler.
I graduated from UW La Crosse. I went for elementary and special education. I actually had to go 5 years because I had to student teach for an entire year to get my degree. So my 5th year of college really was where I acquired more debt than normal. I wasn't given my normal amount of financial aid because I think they assume if you were on a 5-year plan, maybe you weren't as productive as you should have been. And I had to take out private loans, and my parents had to take out private loans as well to get me through that last year of college. Basically, a month before I graduated, they make you granted, this is 8 years ago, so they might have changed it, but at the time, they only had you do like a online debt counseling service, and you read a couple things about student debt, and then at the end, it calculates your total amount of debt. And it just flashed up on the screen. It was like, you're $45,000 in debt. And I was shocked, to be honest. I knew I was taking out loans every year, but just to have that amount was kind of like overwhelming. After graduation, I had to live back home with my parents because I quite honestly couldn't afford to rent anywhere. So I moved back home. I got my first loan payment before consolidating all my loans, and I think my payment was supposed to be around $800 a month. So obviously, like, freaked out. I'm living at home with my parents, teacher salary. So I consolidated all of my loans, and that lowered it quite a bit. After teaching for a couple of years, I started hearing about public loan forgiveness. So I looked more into that, and I found out that my school qualified for that program. So I started looking into that more, applying, trying to get all of that forms in. That process alone took probably 2 years with 4 rejections because of signatures, because something wasn't whited out, like reasons I'm not really sure. So I was told that I was on the route to be in that program. So that, quite honestly, was kind of my light at the end of the tunnel. I had some very rough years teaching, and that was kind of my like, okay, just get through this, get to year 10. Like, you can do it. Like, that was kind of my carrot on the stick. So 2 years ago, I got married and was filing taxes differently, obviously. And then I learned through that program, since I filed taxes with my husband, they based my loan payment off my husband's salary as well. So my loan payments went up again. And then looking into on the website, I noticed quite a bit of my payments weren't counting towards that 10-year payment. So I looked into that more. I called many people, got many different answers. And basically what it came down to was that 6 or 7 years ago at this point now, they signed me up for the wrong payment plan. So I was on an income-based payment plan, but not on the income-based payment plan that was the right one apparently. So I've been told now out of my 96 payments, 8 of them counted. So this all happened like the week of March 11th. So I obviously have been focused on teaching online now. So that hasn't been my focus. Overall, I'm just kind of at a loss with the whole program. I don't feel like I can get a clear answer out of anyone. I don't feel like I have any direction. So part of the reason I'm speaking here today, because I felt that the program is basically a disaster and it's not helping the people it needs to help. So I'm hoping that something will come of it. To be very honest, I don't see a world where my loans are going to be forgiven. I don't see them admitting that there was a mistake made. So although payments are suspended right now, I'm looking into continuing to make payments since I'm still working, just because I don't really trust that they'll make those payments count even over these years or these months that they're forgiven. I just haven't had good experience. So I am hoping that this task force can help people in my situation.
Thank you, Bree. Our heart goes out to you. And it sounds like a horrible situation that you've been in. And we also will help connect you up with some counselors that can help you and help chart a course for you. But we really appreciate, I know it's been a very emotional roller coaster for
I didn't cry today, so I'm getting better.
So we appreciate you sharing your story. Your story is very similar to many, many people out there in the public loan forgiveness programs. And we at the state will try to do everything. You help motivate us as a task force to do good and try and provide solutions. So thank you so much, Bree, for sharing your story today. And now we'll turn to our second speaker, Stephen Ansorge. Stephen recently graduated from Madison College. As a student, Stephen felt the borrowing process was overwhelming, and he was shocked to see how much debt he accrued upon graduation. So, Stephen? Stephen, are you there? Let's see. Stephen, if you're there, you're on mute. We cannot hear you. We will circle back to Stephen in just a moment, and we will move forward to hear from Tom Eaker. Tom is a first-generation college graduate who completed his degree as an adult. He also borrowed using the Parent Plus loans to help his children attend college while having student debt of his own. Tom, would you like to share your story with us?
Hello, everyone. Special greeting to Connie Hutchinson, Kevin McShane, and Kiamani Alford. I know you're on the call today, so hello to all of you. I'm here today as a Parent Plus loan borrower and a co-signer on a private loan. I'm a first-generation college graduate who was an adult degree completer, as Kathy mentioned. I earned my bachelor's degree from UW Superior in 2011 and my master's degree 2 years later. Not only do I have my own student loans to pay, but I'm also trying to give my daughters the opportunity at a college education. I'm currently on an income-based repayment plan for my federal loans, and I'm definitely hoping that public service loan forgiveness is still available when the time comes for me. At this time, there are very few options when it comes to parents trying to help their children pay for higher education. Cost of living and the cost of education do continue to rise for all families, while most wages continue to be stagnant. This situation makes it very difficult for families to save money to help with their children's education. As a parent, I have a deep commitment to wanting better opportunities for my daughters than I had at their age. That simply means that parents are willing to do whatever it takes for their children to have a chance at a better situation. Having two daughters for me means multiple plus or private loans that are going to need to be paid off, basically at a later point in my life. Many families have an income level that is considered too high to have their student qualify for need-based grant dollars, but simply don't make enough money to pay all of their bills and still be able to save money for college for their children. At the same time, interest rates for PLUS loans are currently at little over 7%, 7.08% fixed, while students' undergraduate interest rates are at 4.53%. Private loan from a private lender can have a fixed or variable interest rate from as low as 4% to potentially as high as the APR for a credit card. I'm here not only as a parent borrower, but also a person that works in financial aid and advises students and families regarding student loan programs. Ultimately, my wish for this task force is twofold. First is to be able to research, discuss, and encourage other options for parents to help fund the cost of their students' education. And from an institutional standpoint, for what I do for a living, is to discuss ways for colleges to be a better source of information for students and families as they're entering repayment.
Great, thank you, Tom. You have multiple hats that you are wearing in this process, and it's very real for you, and can see it from very different perspectives, both as a parent and in your day job as working with folks that need your help. So thanks for sharing your story today. And I think we have Stephen back on.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry about that. We couldn't hear you the last time, but glad you're reconnected here.
Excellent, thank you.
Let's see, we talked about that you recently graduated from Madison College. You felt the borrowing process was quite overwhelming, and you were shocked to see at the end how much debt you had accrued upon graduation. So Stephen, if you could share your story, and then we'll open it up if the three borrowers here have agreed to answer some questions. So if you have questions for any of the three, please chat them in. So thank you, Stephen.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I collected some loans, accumulated some subsidized loans with various interest rates. I wanted them to help me pay for classes, obviously, and then also a little bit for food and shelter. I was working 1 to 2 jobs varying throughout the few years I was in college, so I didn't need them immensely, but I was like trying to make sure everything was covered. And yeah, after that, my initial observation of my student loans is that I was surprised how quickly they piled up. I had cursory knowledge that I was accumulating these loans. I just didn't realize at the very end until how much was being accumulated, and I could not imagine anybody going through with taking out max of everything to pay for everything to be in quite the predicament. After I graduated, I actually missed my first payment because I was kind of in the process of getting into my new job, moving, and just getting used to my life outside of college. After that, I took the opportunity to reschedule or refinance my payments. Instead of having the higher rate, I was able to actually get the lower one. So that was extremely helpful because my income was not able to support that. Even though now that the COVID-19 has paused all the payments, I'm still paying on them, especially the ones that have my higher interest rates, because those are going to cost me more in the long run. Looking back on the process itself, or all the loans, it seems so much easier to get the loans or go through that process than it is to find scholarships to help pay for school instead. So it seems like the loan process is very efficient in getting you to get the loans. The college is extremely good at that. And it also helps with getting scholarships, but I feel like that the loans was just so much easier to accumulate. Looking back, finally on my experiences with student loans, I think it would have been more helpful, or at least for myself, to have a financial advisor or some sort to periodically check in to see what I was doing with that money. And like, hey, at this point in time, once you graduate, your loans are going to be at such and such. And also check in to see what kind of career I was going into. If I was going into a $30,000 to $40,000 job year, they might want to advise me not to take out so many loans, and that maybe someone with $80,000 or above career could be paying for. That was one thing I would like to have seen, is just a little bit more upfront about the back end of the student loans. Like up front, everything was fantastic, but at the very end, I just would have been much more fiscally healthy if I would have had a little bit of a financial advisor talking to me. So that was my experience with student loans.
Thank you, Stephen. And Michelle, I think you were going to facilitate some questions for the three of them.
Yes, thank you, Secretary. And you know, Bree, you mentioned that your payments, they had indicated they hadn't counted. Could you expand if you have been given any reason as to why? I think when we spoke, you were still researching and looking into it, but at this point, have they given you a baseline reason as to why they did not count?
It depends on who I talk to. So the first person said I was never in the program whatsoever. They had no record. Which is strange because you don't really, you see if your work qualifies essentially, and then you apply after the 10 years is what I understood from that. So I don't really know what that person was talking about. What I've gotten out of it is what I think has happened, and this could be completely different depending on who you talk to. So to apply for the public, or to qualify, you have to be paying an income-based repayment plan. So whoever I talked to, 5 or 6 years ago, they signed me up for an income-based payment plan, but it wasn't the right one, is basically what I got to. So then I saw you should submit a form. So I was submitting information around, I think it's around with your taxes. And I had no issues. I was making payments. Basically they told me you apply after the 10 years. And then when I got married, I changed payment plans to, I guess, the correct payment plan. But no one through those years of applying ever told me I wasn't on the right payment plan. So they counted, and my confusion comes from, I've been married for almost 2 years. So we filed 2 years of taxes together. They've counted 8 payments. So that, I guess that's what confuses me, because if I was never making why would they count 8 payments? Why wouldn't they count the 2 years of payments that I made on that plan? So I don't know if I answered that question. To my knowledge, I signed up for the wrong income-based payment plan is basically what they told me.
No, I think you did answer it. I mean, part of it is the confusion in your research and navigating the path. So let's see. Any speakers, what to any of the three of you, Stephen, Tom, or Bree, or all three, what type of higher education financial aid counseling did you get from your high school?
I don't know. I don't know if I took finance classes, but none to my knowledge.
Any conversation with a guidance counselor at any point when looking at advanced education?
No, my parents didn't go to college, so I was kind of navigating through my older siblings and their experiences for that. So,
Stephen, did you have any financial aid, higher education financial aid counseling that you received in high school, or any kind of input from a guidance counselor?
From what I remember, no, I don't think I received anything. I took personal finance classes, but that was pretty much it.
Okay. And Tom?
Well, I attended high school much longer ago, but I'll speak basically for my daughter, who is currently attending college. The extent of information she was given regarding financial aid was basically to, complete the FAFSA and then apply for any scholarships you think you might be eligible, whether that be online or in our local community. So that really was the extent of what she was advised to do as a high school junior and senior, was to make sure you complete the FAFSA and then start applying for scholarships that you might be eligible for.
All right. Any other questions from our task force members of these three guests that we have here today? So there is one more. To any of the three of you again, did you choose your school based on affordability in comparison to other options? How was that school selection choice made?
I went because of the major. They had a strong education program at La Crosse, but I didn't even look at going to school outside of state because I knew I couldn't afford that. So I guess, yeah, it did.
I would say definitely, yes. I would say definitely I chose my college because of affordability to fund my curiosity.
And Tom, you or your daughters?
Well, for me, as an adult degree completer, for me, it was finding the flexibility in the program. UW Superior had a very strong distance learning program. I wanted to make sure that if I was going to complete my degree online, that it was through a reputable institution that had a good program. So that was ultimately the decision factor for me. For my daughter, hers was partly based on affordability and location. She wanted to stay within the state of Wisconsin, and we were looking at state school opportunities where we thought would have the most value based on the cost of the education.
And this is for all three of you again. Did the institution you attended offer financial literacy sessions, or were you aware if they offered any? And then did you attend any of those sessions if they were available to get additional information?
I know La Crosse obviously had like a office for financial aid. I remember going there just getting help for like all the FAFSA stuff, but if they did, I was not aware of any programs that they ran during my time there because I would have attended just because I was navigating blind essentially.
Stephen?
Yes. Yeah, I knew my college was offering various financial literacy and other programs like that to help us figure out what to do. I was unable to attend any of them because of my activities on campus and working other jobs. I wasn't able to do them because of time constraints, really.
Were you interested in attending if your time had permitted you to doing so? Is that something that you may have considered attending if?
Yes, I would have.
Right, thank you. And Tom?
I specifically asked my college-age daughter about information that may have been provided to her. Unfortunately, getting young students to read everything that gets sent to them is a challenge. So after the fact, she realized that she was getting information from campus offices and entities about financial literacy. Because of my job, I was able to share information with her to be able to point her in the right direction as to who to contact. But that's definitely different in my household with the knowledge that I have as opposed to your typical student living on campus.
And I think this will be our final question for you. And it's two questions that I'm going to try and compound into one. So a two-parter. So in looking for employment, do you take into consideration whether the employer offers student loan assistance? And with that, the second part of that is, what limits do your student loans place on your future goals and aspirations?
Speaking for my employment, I 100% stayed at my school district because of their qualification for the loan forgiveness. There were many a times where I was unhappy with certain things and I stayed because I was not, the schools around me might not have qualified. Now I enjoy working there a lot. I know this is recorded, but I stay because I enjoy it. But at the time, yep, that was definitely my main reason for staying within that district. For limits, sadly, a lot of my debt affects my life. I'm fortunate that my husband went to tech school. He paid off his debt 3 years ago, so we don't have his equal amount of debt that I do, but it affected where we bought a house. It affects the fact that we don't have new cars. I'm not trying to get any payment. I would love to go back and get my master's degree. That seems to be the only hope to get a raise, essentially, in a post-Act 10 world. I don't see that happening in the near future because I can't even imagine going another $40,000 in debt. I mean, it's even got to the point where it's like we're waiting to have kids because that money I'm paying for my loan is daycare payment. So yes, it has limits.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Bree. Stephen?
Yeah, first part of the question, I haven't really considered it really much for employment, what they offer for anything. And the second part of the question is, I am putting off going to four-year college to pursue another degree until I either pay off my current student loans or somehow find another job to help me pay for that, because I do not want to accumulate another few thousand to $40,000 to $60,000 again. So that's what's limiting me.
Thank you. And Tom?
It has definitely impacted where I work and what my future plans are. The fact that my current position does qualify for public service loan forgiveness definitely makes me want or need to stay where I'm at. Although I love what I do, there are other opportunities that are definitely out there, but the dollar amount of public service loan forgiveness or the potential of that is definitely a big reason to stay where I am.
I want to extend our gratitude again for each of you presenting your personal stories with the task force. A lot of chats came in also extending the importance of your real life testimony in their consideration. So thank you very much for your time and sharing with us today. So the last item on our agenda today, before we hit the 1 o'clock hour, is really the next steps and what we'll be doing. But before we do that, just another extra thanks to all the presenters and speakers for sharing their expertise, experience, and time with us today. Reminder for members that the next meeting is scheduled and will be held via WebEx again. It's meeting number 2 on May 27th. From 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. just in mirroring today. If the task force members have any needs or questions, they can reach out via email to that student debt task force email at dfi.wisconsin.gov. A reminder that there's many resources available on the website as well that was posted earlier. And a few pieces that a number of resources were being conveyed in the chat session today, and we'll be compiling those and sharing that information. If you weren't able to jot it down, we'll be sending out the PowerPoints that were provided today. And there were some questions as it related to how this task force will move forward, reaching consensus, quorum, voting, and a number of those conversations and things came in after the first presentation of the morning on ethics. And those items will be addressed at the next meeting and future meetings as to when we're doing activities and trying to move forward. So those questions have not gone unseen and will be addressed and commented on as well. If you have any comments related to today's meeting, related to the logistics, facilitation, flow, as your facilitator, please let me know. So we are always wanting to improve our meetings and build our team. So my email address is there, michelle.reinen@wisconsin.gov. Please reach out if you do have specific content questions. Again, those would go to the Student Debt Task Force at dfi.wisconsin.gov. So with that, thank you everyone for attending today, making time in your schedules to be part of this task force. We appreciate each and every one of you and what you will be bringing to the table as we move forward.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.